All right. Hello and welcome to Cell Communication Part 2. This is the adventures of Ned the neuron. And so we're going to look at neurotransmitters, so neurons are the cells of our nervous system. And neurotransmitters were traditionally considered the communication between those cells, but they actually are communication many other places in our body, our immune system, our digestive system, everywhere in our body seems to work with neurotransmitters. So it's much more than the nervous system, which actually makes you want to ponder, what is the nervous system? Is it just the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerve cells? So are we limited with this definition of the anatomy and the physical, or is it much, much more? All right, there is this classic black and white sketch drawing. I love these pictures from the older textbooks of what a neuron looks like. So a nerve cell, and they're just beautiful because normally we think of cells as these like roundish things with the nucleus in the center. And nerve cells have these long projections, and these long projections, like roots and stems, right, are what are called the axons and the dendrites. When you take anatomy, you learn all these little pieces, but these are their connections between each other. And our nerve cells connect all over with each other. It's not just one nerve cell to one other nerve cell. There's like bunches and bunches of connections. So, well, most of you have more nerve cells than I do because we actually lose nerve cells at some point in our 20s. We actually make more connections. So as we learn, as we meditate, doing different things, we make more connections. So it's the connectivity between all the nerves. But the part that's important is, so an impulse is sent, since that's what it's trying to show in the upper right-hand corner. So this impulse is electrical in nature. I'm doing little quotes with my fingers because the electricalness of it is the movement of ions. So ions have a charge. So sodium and potassium are positive charge. And that movement of the ions creates this idea of electricity moving, because electricity is a movement of electrons. So it's a movement of a charge across the cell membrane, and it's moving super fast, right? So it reaches a point, though there's a gap between one nerve cell to the next, or one cell to the next. And so that gap is where the neurotransmitters are important. And so in the lower left-hand corner, it shows a sketch of this. We see mitochondria we're going to get to eventually. But what happens is this is called the synapse. So you have the presynapse, which is the upper part, and it has the neurotransmitters in these little packages, and it releases them across what's called the synaptic cleft. And so it travels across to the next cell. Now, the thing that's really cool is that space, the cleft, which I often call the space between the cells, it's 1 nanometer. The width of your hair is a micrometer, which is a millionth of a meter. And so like your nail, like the thickness of your nail, I think is a millimeter or something. I can't remember. So anyway, your hair follicles are a micrometer, a millionth of a meter. The synapse is a nanometer, which is a billionth, so 1,000 times smaller. It's this tiny space, but a lot goes on in that space. So neurotransmitters, billions, quadrillions, couldn't even count them, go across, and then they bind to the receptor on the other side, and then an ion gate opens. And so this picture, more like, well, this was like still older because of the drawing, but it shows it. It has some mistakes, but the idea is you have this signal is coming along, and it reaches the synapse, this area between the two cells. And so we have these vesicles, which are those green circles in there. So I'm in the middle of the picture, and it's filled with all the red balls. So those little red balls are the neurotransmitter. And so when this action potential reaches that point, they're released. All the red balls are released into the synapse. And then on the other side, you have the receptors. Almost always, the receptors are post-synapse. And so the red balls bind there, and then an ion gate opens. So this slide in the middle has a mistake because it shows some of the red balls making it inside the post-synapse. And I'm not aware that that happens. So in the upper right-hand corner, we have, we'll see if I can ever get the laser to work, probably not. So you can see he's beautiful. He's got all these like branches and stuff and the connections from different places. But we're going to look over here in the upper left hand. So we see dopamine, serotonin, Gaba, noradrenaline. There's a whole bunch. We're going to talk about them. We're going to put them into different chemical classifications. And these are called the ligands. They are the neurotransmitters. And so they are the molecules that cross the synaptic cleft. They're actually pretty simple molecules. They're going to be smallish in nature compared to the other players. So they travel from one cell to the next. So they're the communication, and they elicit the response. They get a lot of credit. Now, the mistake again in the middle of the slide is they don't actually enter. They bind to the receptor and they say, do something. Hey, signal, right? They get a lot of credit. So the next are the receptors, and that little target is there because that's the target that the ligands are trying to hit. And they each, the puzzle pieces, because each one of them, whether it's dopamine, serotonin, GABA, noradrenaline, each one has a unique shape and fits like a puzzle into a different puzzle piece. So each receptor, the receptors are much bigger. Excuse me. The picture doesn't show credit, but the little red balls, they are tiny little molecules, the ligands, neurotransmitters. So the receptors are huge. They're these large complex proteins, and it's what the neurotransmitter binds. So ligand is just the word for the molecule that binds to something else. And the key here is an ion gate has to open. So it's that movement again of ions from one across a membrane that makes this potential of electricity moving along. And almost all the receptors are post-synaptic. So 2 years ago, I would have said they always are, but research has changed, and there is actually at least one category that is not, and we'll get to that. All right, there is another big player, and that is enzymes. There are, and I show it as a shark, because the enzymes are hydrolases. Remember a hydrolase, we just learned about them. They hydrolyze, they cut something in half using water. And so they're gonna hydrolyze the ligands, the neurotransmitters. So dopamine's coming in here, all goofy as dopamine is. And that's actually a great picture with dopamine, I'd imagine it. And the shark doesn't eat it up, it just chomps it in half. And so dopamine can't do its thing. And so it has to go back and get put back together. And it's a way, yeah, so the enzyme's a key player. The enzyme patrols in the cleft, in the synaptic cleft space there. And so there's a lot of them. This is a tiny, tiny, itty bitty space. All right, so over on the right side of the slide, there is a picture of a plant, because whenever you see that prefix phyto, it means plant. So there are all these molecules in our best friends, the plants, that actually behave like the ligands that are natural to our bodies. The neurotransmitters are made in our body, but there's a whole bunch of plant molecules that also bind to these neuroreceptors. Morphine would be probably the most classic one from thousands of years ago. And these are all going to be ones that have the abuse aspect to them, possibly. Some of them will mimic, some of them will inhibit the receptors. So like LSD actually blocks the receptor, and we'll get to that. THC is going to bind and stimulate the receptor for anandamide. And so it was really fascinating. It was actually a lot of these plant molecules were actually studied first, and then they found the receptors for them like later, and that would be in the past century. And then once they started finding these receptors, once we understood proteins, they started saying, wait a minute, why do we have receptors for these plant molecules? Do we already have these molecules in our body? And then the search was on for the neurotransmitters, and we keep finding more. And then finally, the bottom slide is drugs. So there are so many drugs, whether it's an antidepressant, something like gabapentin, that are to keep us all happy and free from pain, right? So the opioids, these are all man-made molecules that are trying to mimic or inhibit the ligands. So they're made to bind to the receptor to either stimulate the receptor, that would be an agonist, or to block the receptor. So what you needed from the slide is this idea that we have the ligands, the receptors, the enzymes, these different categories of players. We're going to now look at the different chemical classes of neurotransmitters. So this, you need to write down all this information. And that picture is some artist's rendition of a neurotransmitter. So in the upper right is the action potential would be coming from the upper right down. And you can tell that because there's those vesicles, which is the packages of thousands, probably a million neurotransmitters in the vesicle. And the action potential comes down and it binds, it becomes part of the membrane and just releases the neurotransmitters into that space, into the cleft between the two neurons. And then they bind to the receptor and the potential keeps going on. And they really make this look like an electrical cord. But different from our electrical cord where you actually have to plug one into the next, there's always this itty bitty space that we would not be able to perceive with our eyes. All right, first chemical class is called cholinergic, and it gets its name. There's only one neurotransmitter in this category that I am aware of, but there are many man-made and natural-made compounds that mimic it. And so in our body, the neurotransmitter is called acetylcholine. It is, and we're going to talk about it in the next couple of slides. The next category are the polypeptides. So polypeptides we talked about with hormones. So they're small peptides, usually like say 8 or 10 amino acids. And there's actually some that are really small, like 3. And these are the ones that are really fascinating because they're finding new ones like almost every week. And so it's like our body creates what we need. And so you just take 3 amino acids, put them together, and it can create a response based on our thoughts. So the big ones in this category are the endorphins. The enkephalins are the same thing as endorphins. So they were discovered in the US and called endorphins, and they were discovered in Europe at the same time and called enkephalins. And it took a little bit of time to realize they were studying the same molecule. So we'll talk about them. There's also something called substance P. The P stands for pain. And then they just started giving them neuropeptide A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Now they just get letters, and there's thousands of these. And they all seem to deal with pain perception. So the P should actually be for perception. All right, so the opioids. When we get to the opioids, because they are our pain perception, we're going to see they're going to mimic these. The next category we saw before, also with hormones, are the amino acid derivatives. And there's more of these. These are also known as the monoamines because they're going to have one amino group. They're also known as the catecholamines. And we'll see a picture when we get to this category of what that word means. But it's just that some people still use that terminology. The receptors are called the catecholamine receptors. And so if you go into more advanced biochemistry, they actually use the term catecholamine. And so these are the ones everybody's heard of: serotonin, dopamine, melatonin, epinephrine, norepinephrine. And I have slides about each of these, so we'll look at them in more detail. Again, these are just the 5 categories and then an example within each category. So what you'll see, like in the homework or possibly on your midterm, it would say which of the following is an amino acid derivative, and it would say acetylcholine, endorphin, serotonin. You'd say, oh, serotonin is an amino acid derivative, right? And the next category, number 4, is the amino acids. So an amino acid derivative has been altered and changed. An amino acid is the same amino acid. And there's a couple of these, but two of the most common ones that people have heard of are Gaba. So Gaba is a big one. It's a calming one. And aspartate. And I mention aspartate because that's where aspartame, the artificial sweetener we talked about way back in the first 2 weeks. That's one of the issues with it. And there is a fifth category I've created. Wasn't there 5 years ago. It has to be there now. So there's actually many more categories. We're just going to put them under other right now. And under other, I wrote adenosine and anandamide. There's probably many other neurotransmitters. Like I said, there's thousands of these. We're discovering new ones all the time. Adenosine and anandamide are really important. And so I wanted to touch on them. And they don't fall into any of their classifications. Adenosine is going to be a nucleotide, one of the building blocks of DNA. And anandamide is a fatty acid derivative. So we'll just put them for now under other and keep going. All right, and there's our picture again. So the axon, this one's going from left to right. The vesicles are there. It releases the red balls. They bind to the receptors. So the receptors are those projections on the dendrite. You don't need to know the word axon and dendrite, but this is the idea. They have to go in. And then the thing why I have this picture there is it shows the enzyme at the bottom. And so the enzyme destroys the neurotransmitter, and a better word than destroy is hydrolyzes. It cuts it in half. It doesn't actually destroy the molecule, it cuts it in half. So it's no longer efficient. And so it gets recycled back to the beginning, gets put back together, and it's used again. So our body doesn't destroy things, it recycles them and uses them again. All right. Now, take notes on this. Something your teacher, there's two basic types of receptors. And so they are called the ionotropic receptors and the metabolotropic receptor. Yeah, try and say that word right. So the key with all the neurotransmitters is you have to open when they bind to the other side of the synaptic cleft, you have to open a channel. So you have to allow them. So in this picture, this is a little frustrating, but the red balls this time are the ions, the green balls are the neurotransmitters. So we have to get the red balls to start flowing in on the next cell so that this potential then travels down the whole neuron. So the green ball binds the neurotransmitter. So we're going to look at the ionotropic first. And the ionotropic, the neurotransmitter binds, and the receptor, the big purple thing, and the receptors are huge proteins that are embedded in the cell membrane. They don't move, they don't leave. The receptor is the gate. So you can see the gate is closed, the neurotransmitter binds, and suddenly it's open and it comes in. And this, actually, let's go back. We'll come back to that. Then the second type is the metabolotropic. And this one, there's a couple steps. So the neurotransmitter binds, this big blob that they're showing is the receptor. Receptors are not blobs, they're gorgeous molecules, they're huge. And the receptor, a change happens to the receptor and it kicks over and kicks another protein, and that protein releases cyclic AMP or some kind of second messenger, and that then opens an ion gate. So there's several steps involved. So you can think about this. Which one's going to be fast? And which one's going to be quite a bit slower, like 1,000 times slower. So one's going to be working in like a millisecond, and the other one's going to take like a second or maybe 5 seconds. So this picture at the top shows, of course, the ionotropic is super fast. That it binds and boom, as soon as it binds, you've opened the channel. Whereas the metabolotropic is much slower because it binds, we have to go through a couple steps. However, you have this potential that you can keep stimulating receptors. The problem with the ionotropic is once the ion gate opens, piece that's really important is the gate has to close. So you open the door, but then it has to close again. So it's a one-time deal. Because in the metabolotropic, the receptor is not the gate, you can keep stimulating. So the gate opens and then it closes, and then you can keep stimulating. So one neurotransmitter has actually a huge response. And then the other thing that happens is that red circle that suddenly appeared, maybe you noticed it or not, is the second messenger, saying here the intracellular messengers, that there's a cascade effect that one neurotransmitter will release a whole bunch of cyclic AMPs, and they will stimulate a whole bunch of gates to open up. So there's an amplification, and you get multiple depolarizations can happen. So you can keep stimulating it as long as you can keep the neurotransmitter there. You can keep stimulating, opening the gate, because the gate will open and close, open and close. Whereas in the ionotropic, it's a one-time deal. The gate opens, the neurotransmitter must leave. It must be, the shark must come along and hydrolyze it. And so then the gate can close. All right. And so this is just showing fast versus slow. Like a slug, really not quite like a slug. All right. Acetylcholine. So our first category of neurotransmitters we're going to look at, and it's chemistry, so we show the molecule. So remember that when you guys are going to be picking your next topic. You would have just finished our first round of talks on something related to some kind of food, and I'm sure they were amazing. And so you're going to be doing another set of presentations. This time you're going to pick a molecule. So a lot of people will pick a neurotransmitter or a hormone. And the key on this presentation, you have to make sure front and center, you show a picture of your molecule. So it is chemistry. An acetyl group is a 2-carbon group, and then the choline group is this other group. The zigzags again are carbons, and then there's a nitrogen there. So it's actually tiny and very simple and very hydrophilic. And acetylcholine is huge. It's really, really important, not huge. It's a tiny molecule, and it regulates the movement of our muscles. There are other ones that regulate movement of the muscles, but this is the big one. This is, and this acts really fast. It is, receptor is the ion gate, which means it's one of the ionotropic. So it's super fast. Because we need our muscles when you stab your toe, right? Not stab it, but stub it. Kick something, you want your body to respond immediately. I got to remove, put your hand on something that's hot, you want to remove it immediately. So you need this fast response of the movement to say, hey, move your hand, and that it moves. This is just a picture of the receptor. And the receptor is quaternary structure. So you have a midterm coming up, and it has multiple polypeptide chains, multiple units. And so it's closed right now, and then it's going to open up. There's the gate. So it's showing that the multiple units, like this is one part in the upper circle, that you have multiple, this one polypeptide chain is crossing the membrane several times. And then there we go. This is just picture that the agonist would be the ligand or something else that can make it. Binds, it opens up, and the ions come in. All right. And that's just a picture of me being geeky, but we talked about proteins. That's part of our second midterm. And there you can see. So the area one is, the middle picture is looking down, and it's just beautiful. I imagine my receptors are like this. They're rainbows and colors. So you can see there's 5 different units. And then the other one is looking, and so that part that you can see the alpha helices down below, so that would be inside the membrane. And so that would be hydrophilic. And then that middle part, that's a whole bunch of beta sheets, that's going to be hydrophobic, because that's going to be in the middle of the membrane. And then that very tip top, that's just a little part. That's where the acetylcholine or some other thing is going to bind. All right, so esterase, when you see the ending ASE, you're thinking, oh, that's an enzyme. If you weren't, you should be. It's on your test. We just talked about this. All right, so This is the enzyme. This is the shark. It's residing in the cleft, in the space between the two neurons or the two cells. And so the acetylcholine is released and it's going to bind to the receptor, but somewhere in the middle, it's going to get eaten up. And that's actually important for acetylcholine. So it hydrolyzes. And that's actually important because the gate has to close. So in the ionotropic, the gate stays open. You only get one depolarization happening. So you have to remove the acetylcholine so that the gate can close. So the hydrolase, the esterase in this case, is extremely important. It's different with the metabolotropic. And that's a hard thing for some students to get, but those two classifications behave differently. So you need to empty the receptor so that another acetylcholine can bind. Now, the thing that's interesting is half of the acetylcholines are actually hydrolyzed before they ever even reach the receptor. That's like Trivial Pursuit questions, right? So it's like those little sea turtles. They don't all make it to the ocean, but like 1,000 hatch and only so many make it to the ocean. So it's the same thing with acetylcholine. So our body releases a whole bunch in hopes that some will reach there. Some of them will stimulate the first time, get eaten, and then others will stimulate it again. And so again, the esterase is the shark, the enzyme that allows the whole system. Without the shark, it would not work. You would be paralyzed. Without the shark, it would open up and then you'd be frozen. You would be stuck. All right, tubocurarine. So we're gonna play the game agonist or antagonist. That's a picture of acetylcholine for chemistry geeky, and that's tubocurarine. And you're like, doesn't look the same. If you actually turn it and the two red balls match up kind of with the blue ball, and it's all that, it's a perception. Does a little piece of it fit into the receptor? So tubocurarine, if you don't know what it is, I'm pretty sure this is poison dart frog. And so it actually competes for the binding. And so when it binds, it was too bulky. If we look, it's just way too bulky. And so it binds there and it's going to block the whole receptor. And so the ions aren't going to do anything. All right. These are different pictures of different ones that can block acetylcholine. They show up in your somewhere. So first one is actually deadly nightshade, belladonna, which is a homeopathic. The poison dart frog, so it's a molecule on their skin. So if you have one in captivity, so if you have them in your own home, some people have little terrariums with, these guys are tiny. They're like the size of your thumbnail. So if you ever go to Costa Rica, they're gorgeous. But they actually can't make the poison here. Our weather and the diet is probably different. It probably has to do with the vitamin D and the exposure. So Costa Rica is almost at the equator, so 12-hour days, whole year round. Cobra toxin also. These are all working because the molecule is very similar to acetylcholine and it binds the receptor and blocks it and you're paralyzed. Receptor can't open or close. And so your muscle is stuck. It can't be stimulated. There are muscle relaxants that are used by our paramedics that actually do the same thing. They either are going to block it or they're going to open it. In either case, they're an antagonist because even though they might work to open it, if the enzyme, the shark, is going, what the heck is this? I can't eat this up. It's too big and bulky. So it might fit into the receptor, but then it just stays in the receptor. And so I had actually a student who was a paramedic one year, and he did his topic on succinylcholine and actually brought in a kit. And so when somebody's intubated, so if you're going to try to help them breathe and you stick a tube down their throat, we have a gag reflex. So even if you're unconscious for whatever reason, you're going to gag it out. And so they actually have to paralyze you to get the tube in to keep you alive. And so succinylcholine is something that paralyzes, it knocks out these receptors. They get the tube in and they can ventilate you. And so you can see it's just too bulky, so the enzyme can't cut it down. Botox also. So Botox is fascinating because people with, I have a good family friend of my mom's, and her eye was always tick, 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 tick. She was always moving her eye. And they found out, so Botox is a poison, right? It's botulism. And that if they injected it into people straight into the nerve, it deadened the nerve because the nerve couldn't, it paralyzed that one nerve. And then they didn't have the facial tics because the nerve suddenly was just like frozen. And what happened was they noticed these people didn't get wrinkles where they had injected the Botox. It only lasts for a certain amount of time. And so it became a beauty thing. And so there you go. So people who are consumed with their physical appearance, beauty comes from deep within, not from without. Oh, there we go. Choline. It is found in the egg yolk. And it is converted by our body when you eat eggs. It is converted by the bacteria in your digestive tract into trimethylamine. So it just is the nitrogen with those 3 CH3s and the other piece is cut off. So it's no longer choline. And trimethylamine is then changed in the liver. And it doesn't, people who don't eat meat, this doesn't happen. And they don't know if it is that the liver is trying to detoxify it, or if the liver is just so overwhelmed when people consume a huge amount of meat, especially the type of meat that is sold in this country with all the fast food and highly processed stuff. So the liver is just overwhelmed and doing the best it can, but it gets oxidized, and it gets oxidized into something that's actually one of the best indicators for heart attack. It's a better indicator than cholesterol. Cholesterol is no longer a top indicator. It's just we made a drug to lower cholesterol, so cholesterol still gets all the hype, even though it's not a good indicator. This trimethylamine is actually a really good indicator. The levels of trimethylamine, actually, when you get a blood test, when you reach a certain age, they often, when you do a blood test, will test you for this, especially if you're a male, to see what your levels are in your blood of the oxidized form. And it's actually a good indicator of the health of your arteries. So heart attack, stroke, early death. The thing is the levels are really high in 20 and 30-year-olds. And they must have gone up astronomically with COVID, because sadly, restaurants, like 70% of restaurants have closed, and fast food has just, you've all seen the lines at fast food. I don't know if I mentioned this. I made a prediction when COVID was happening. I'm like, oh, good, maybe everybody shut up for a month. I thought it would only be a month, like all of us. People will start cooking at home and eating healthier. And of course, people started going out for fast food. All right. Eggs, by the way, are also linked to asthma. There's actually a huge link. There's lots of studies on it. But anyway, trimethylamine, be a cool topic if you want to learn more about it. All right, our next category, we're going to go through these one at a time, but just this was the same thing with hormones. Monoamines, which are the amino acid derivatives, and polypeptides, whether it was hormones or neurotransmitters, whenever they are a chemical messenger of any type, they always use a second messenger. They are a metabotropic. They are not a one-step. It's that they bind the receptor creates a second messenger, kicks an enzyme that makes the second messenger, and the second messenger inside the cell, inside the second cell, says, hey, open up gate. All right, and so there's kind of the picture, it binds, and there's several steps involved. All right, so this is a monoamine. So it is called a monoamine because of that NH2 that's sticking up. It was an amino acid. It's missing the acid part. So the acid part got cut off, but this is serotonin, if you don't recognize it. And serotonin is often called the happy neurotransmitter. And so low levels of serotonin, you'll end up with depression. Depression is linked actually to several things, but it is low serotonin. It can also cause aggressive behavior. The Hulk, that gamma incident, knocked out all of his serotonin. He has none. He has a serious serotonin like negativity. If you have normal serotonin, you'll be happy. Or how can we make normal serotonin? Well, we have a drug for that. Besides cholesterol lowering drugs, these guys are the biggest money producer, biggest placebo effect. Also, we get to that eventually. You can also find joy through meditations. That's a picture of the Dalai Lama. And I don't know if I talked about it yet, but I actually tutored 30 years ago some Tibetan monks in Salt Lake City. When I lived in Salt Lake, they had just gotten off a plane from India, did not speak a word of English. And so they were 3 Tibetan monks, and I got to teach them English. And Sunam never spoke a word of English, but he and I could communicate. They were always happy. They were just always joyful. I would go there twice a week, and it was just pure bliss. So again, this is who was the teacher and who was the student. And the very first time I visited, I was expecting them to be in their saffron robes, and I'm like all excited as I'm walking down the hall to their dorm room where the Tibetans were, and they were in blue jeans and New York Yankee sweatshirts, and Sunam was doing an imitation of an American with his Yankee baseball cap on. People had given him all these clothes and stuff, and not speaking English, but it was. And then he saw me, and they were like, gave me katas and stuff, but it was the funniest, perfect imitation of what an American looks like and acts like. All right, anyway, but research, you are again going to find at least 2 research papers on your molecule. Scientists from the University of Montreal showed meditation has a direct impact on the brain's production of serotonin. You'll go into a little bit more detail than that. So you're going to see numbers throughout the slideshow, and these numbers are about the molecules of meditation. And so serotonin is a molecule that is much affected by meditation. Interestingly, 90% of your serotonin receptors. This is important. Oh, by the way, that picture there is the pathway in chemistry of how it's made. So tryptophan is the name of the amino acid that is the precursor to serotonin. It goes through 2 steps. So the first step is a hydroxylase, and then a decarboxylase, where the carboxyl group is taken off and it's no longer an amino acid because it loses the acid, and it makes serotonin. So that happens in our body. But anyway, 90% of your receptors, you've all had butterflies in your tummy, like when you had to do a class presentation, that was serotonin. So in your gut, in your small intestine, 90%, nowhere in your brain, not in your limbic system, your emotions, any of that, 90% are in your small intestine. Why are 90% of our happiness receptors in our small intestine? Well, interestingly, they regulate the movement of your small intestine. So people having issues with constipation and diarrhea, the drugs actually target serotonin. And a lot of pharmaceuticals, serious side effects of diarrhea and constipation, one or the other or both. Oh my gosh, there was a laser. I don't know how I did that. Yeah. So let it rip. It's good for you. So talking about the small intestines, your microbiota. So about 51 to 53% of your cells are your microbiota, the cells, the bacteria that live on our skin and our small intestines. 99% of our DNA is actually these guys. So respect them. And so your diet affects your mood. You all know you've had a meal, probably a meal like that one, and you just feel crappy the next day because you're filled with crap. Things are not moving through. Your microbiome's going, what the heck? Respect us. Or you eat a diet, when you eat really good and really clean, hopefully you have been that you made a healthy change and you picked another really good healthy change. It's just, again, there's so much information before COVID. It just, the ability, we'll talk about when we get to DNA, the ability to analyze DNA is when we suddenly started. Before I think it was before 2010, there would be like 2 or 5 papers a year on the microbiome. And now there's like 2 to 5 every hour reported on it, because it's so important. And one, they love fiber. They love fruit. They love beans. They love vegetables. The fiber has to be packaged in real food. It can't be Metamucil fiber. It can't do anything with that. They need the food. It's all in the vibrations. No idea what that picture was, but it's happy microbiota. Eat healthy. Serotonin is more than happiness. Yeah. I had a class and they loved the gingerbread men, so just bear with me. It does affect your mood, right? You've all been in that bite me mood. Stay away from me. It affects your sleep, and we're going to talk about melatonin in a moment. It affects your appetite and digestion. We just talked about that. It affects your anxiety. You know, if your head gets chopped off, you're going to have a little bit of anxiety, or that gingerbread man, poor guy. It affects your memory, your perception, your social behavior, your desire for another person. And do you need to write all that down? It's more than happiness. And then you take things like anatomy and you learn that there's a receptor in the frontal cortex and it says cognition, memory, perception, hippocampus memory, and somebody's writing all this down and paused me. What you really need to know is, does any of that matter? If it's in the limbic system, the hippocampus, we've overanalyzed the brain. It's not about the brain. 98% of your receptors are in your small intestines. What you eat affects your happiness. What you think affects your happiness. If you're bloated, it's really hard to be bloated and happy. All right, you can ponder that point. All right, serotonin regulation is a mind control. So we're going to play the agonist or antagonist game. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of these. So they are called, so the enzyme is MAO. It's in the middle. It's really cool. Oh, I'm trying to get the laser. So it's that purple thing in the middle. And they show it at the beginning. And then that's the enzyme. That's the shark. So the blues and the greens are noradrenaline and serotonin being released into the synapse. And remember, these are metabolotropic. So in ionotropic, you have to break it down to keep stimulating. On these, if you break it down, you lose the stimulation because one serotonin molecule can keep stimulating over and over. So you've heard the comment, you want to inhibit MAO inhibitors. It's like if you take a MAO inhibitor, it means an antidepressant. So if you inhibit MAO, you're an agonist. And so it allows, if you inhibit MAO, if you inhibit the enzyme that would cut it apart, you can keep the serotonin going for longer. And so it's an agonist. And then there's ones that are called the SSRIs. So selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So you're preventing the serotonin to go back to the beginning. You're keeping it. If you can keep the monoamine or the polypeptide in the cleft, in the space longer, that's a good thing. That's an agonist. With ionotropic, it would be an antagonist because the gate has to close. All right. There's all these different slides that you can plagiarize and say what you can do to boost your serotonin. The number of smiling. All right. Number one thing is happiness. This is not the number one thing, but I think almost all, if not all, hallucinogens mimic serotonin. So they're called indolamines. That I just circled serotonin there. And LSD is down there in the lower left-hand corner. And you'd have to twist it to see the similarity. So it actually binds to the receptor and blocks the receptor, so nothing can bind there. And it doesn't stimulate it, it just blocks it, and you hallucinate. It would seem like you would go into sadness. And I know people who, so LSD is not abused because it's hallucinogen, but they did LSD all the time. And they went from being this really happy person to they started just wearing black all the time and walking around with like sadness, like really messed up. Psilocybin is the magic mushrooms, which these are all actually fascinating because with a guide, with a therapist, there's a key word there. A guide or a therapist is there. So psilocybin changes, it's down in the lower part there. It looks just like serotonin. It actually can be used for treatment of PTSD and also for people with cancer. And so they say what it does is you have this effect where, so in a clinical thing, that the guide is able to walk you through the incident you had, but you're looking at it as a third person and able to process it and accept what happened. MDMA was on the previous slide. So it actually doesn't mimic serotonin. It actually makes your body release the mother load of serotonin. And so you just love everyone. Everything is amazing. You are in happiness. You love everyone. And so those are, yeah. So normally you're releasing in the lower left-hand corner a normal amount of serotonin while you're on ecstasy. It's just like, ooh, all this stuff. And so what happens is your body says, whoa, whoa, okay. And it stops producing it. And I have no idea any of these, never done any of it, never had to. Meditation, you never have this after effect. But what I've heard is you go into the closet after, you just go into a darkness. So I don't understand why you would want that middle phase if you know you're going to have darkness after. Meditation, you just get bliss, your body hits, and it's for days after. And if you take too much, your neurons start to deteriorate. The good news is your neurons actually can regenerate when you start behaving and doing meditation, which, as you know, is going to be the next lab. Melatonin, it gets a number. It's another molecule of meditation, and it is made from serotonin. So the picture over to the side shows the pathway. Most people have heard of melatonin. You can take it in the store, right? And if you take melatonin and it helps you sleep, that is wonderful. That is your belief, and keep that belief. If somebody in your life takes melatonin, that's wonderful. You can do research on it. So melatonin is not actually what makes you go to sleep. It is released when you go to sleep. Ponder that. You have to have darkness for this enzyme to do its thing, which is to change serotonin into melatonin. That doesn't happen. That's not a good thing. You need this to happen. You need to go to bed. You need to turn off your computer. You need to turn off your Facebook. You need to turn off everything. You're not going to like this comment at 10 o'clock at night. Studies are out there. After 10 o'clock, you just go to bed. You can read. You got to read a book. All right. And you got to buy a face mask because you got to be in complete darkness. So the pineal gland, so the third eye activation, responds to darkness, and the pineal gland then releases melatonin, and melatonin affects your appetite. Right? If your sleep is off, you're anxious, you have memory problems. So before an exam, always get a good night's sleep. And your perception, always, every night, get a good night's sleep. And so research from Rutgers in New Jersey found meditation pretty much doubled your levels of melatonin. And if somebody has a consistent practice, so more than a week, more than a month, my hope is that after this week that you start finding the bliss. It's going to be hard at first. Some people get it right away. Everybody has their own method, and we'll talk about that in class. 300%. That's a 4-fold increase in melatonin. very different from having to take it at the store. That alone should make you want to meditate. Doesn't mean you have to sit like the doggy, and maybe you'll get to that point. You will. Anyway, melatonin is sleep. That is such a wonderful picture. My dog is not that size. My dog and cat are the same size, and they just snuggle all day long in bliss together, and it's so wonderful to see. But melatonin is so much more than about sleep. There are many things involved in sleep. It is actually your circadian rhythms. There's like all this research coming out about Alzheimer's and Parkinson and your circadian rhythms. So your circadian rhythms is your sleep cycle, your so much more. This is big, so it's in that hot pink magenta. Melatonin is the most powerful antioxidant in our body. It is, for a number, it's so much more strong than vitamin C. This is really the purpose of melatonin. The purpose, sleep, there is more stuff going on with consciousness. That's a totally different subject. But while you're asleep, your body, the temple, your physical temple has to be repaired from all the damage during the day. And so melatonin is on the cleanup crew. It is the top janitor. It's going around and it loves its job, but it needs you to sleep. And while you're sleeping, it goes around and it repairs the body. It's really good at a job. You need to start going to sleep. Make your next healthy change. Give up social media for a month. Can you imagine how you would feel? All right. And picture of the squirrel looking in the mirror. Most students tell me, no, this isn't true. But usually when you look in the mirror in the morning, you're like, wow, my eyes, why do I have circles in my eyes? But you usually do look younger. Pictures taken in the morning are usually better. And yeah, whether you believe me or not. So if you have low melatonin, you're like this cat, you just lay there. Sleep, sleep, sleep. Can I sleep? Your sleep is interrupted. Your immune system's interrupted. You gotta get sleep for good immunity. Your heart disease, cancer, cancer, cancer. Melatonin is this huge antioxidant. And so cancer cells actually have receptors for melatonin. Cancer cells are normal cells that somehow got changed. So we want to get them back to normal. Melatonin mellows. It's called melatonin, right? So people with prostate cancer and also autism have half the receptors. So they're losing this ability to bind to the melatonin. So how can you get more receptors? Get a sleep mask, turn off all social media, start going to bed at 9 o'clock, get up earlier, and meditate. All right. Breast cancer, 1/10. I know, right? 1/10 the normal melatonin. Night shift workers have 50% increase in different cancers. So this is me 2 years ago. So COVID happened. Joey, my son, he saw better than me, even though he says he didn't see, but he updated our Wi-Fi in the first week, and he bought us Batman's Wi-Fi, and my sleep went down the tube. I have always fallen asleep before my head even hits the pillow. And 2 weeks into it, I'm like walking around like a zombie, and I'm thinking it's because I have to do Zoom and all this stuff on the computer, and I'm like, wow, I have to learn a whole new way of teaching. And then somehow on my YouTube, something came up about EMFs and melatonin, and suddenly the light bulb went off, and our Wi-Fi is actually programmed. It goes off for 12 hours a day at night from 9 till 9. So some of our computers are hardwired the Ethernet cord, so they can have the internet if we need it for some reason, or early in the morning if I'm grading in the morning. But our Wi-Fi is off so that there's none of these EMFs. So EMF is electromagnetic fields. Our body, this is our Merkaba. or our electromagnetic field. And so we're giving off an electromagnetic field, and all electronics give them off, and they interfere with ours. Every different organ in our body gives off an electromagnetic field, and so radio waves. So by the way, so the last pandemic 100 years ago was when there was suddenly an increase in the radio waves. And so this pandemic happened when 5G, remember 2 years ago when there was all the hubbub about 5G and people were like anti-5G, and then the pandemic happened and you didn't hear anything more about it, and 5G happened because we needed it suddenly to communicate. But there's a change in the EMFs, and suddenly our immune system changes. Anyway, most people have tons of electronics. I have a good friend who has seriously problems, and I go over and I'm like, I don't even know where to begin. He has so many electronics in his bedroom. You need to get as much out as you can. You don't need your computer in your bedroom, and if it's there, turn it off. Make your Wi-Fi. You can program it so it's off at night. Yeah, get rid of all of this. All right. So this is like those pictures where they show the EMFs come in and they change the cells and blah, blah, blah. But another big one is birds migrate by sending vibrations, and bees and ants also vibrations. And so the whole 5G has interrupted that. And marine mammals, our beautiful friends, the dolphins and the whales. Lots of scientific knowledge is out there. It deteriorates the melatonin. It actually affects our melatonin, and then blood cells get destroyed, DNA strands break, and misfirings in the brain. There's tons of stuff out there about EMFs. That was my like little rabbit hole and stuff. Meditation, on the other hand, brings you, as well as harmonious thoughts, positivity, good vibes. What are the things serenely that I can change? Smiling on the inside. 95% of your conversations, maybe 98% of your conversations, never leave your brain. They're to yourself. So give yourself love every day. So again, talked about those, that mothers, right, with babies, there's that whole sing to yourself. That's the whole idea behind chanting. Anyway, so we're we're vibrational beings, and it has an effect actually on melatonin. All right, that's Rupert Sheldrake, who is, I think he's a physicist in England. He is a physicist, and he has done a lot of this work on EMF. Also, this is, he does a lot of work on the thing where your dog knows when you're coming home. And that's all a melatonin and a vibrational thing. All right, next one is dopamine. So this one is coming from tyrosine. So there's a picture of what a catecholamine. And so this becomes dopamine, and then dopamine gets changed to noradrenaline or norepinephrine, which then gets changed to epinephrine. But dopamine is a big neurotransmitter related to ADHD, hyperactivity. And so you can see the brain of somebody without ADHD is normal. The red is normal firing. Somebody with ADHD, they don't have a lot of dopamine. Dopamine is what makes you pay attention and allows you to sit and listen. So if you're like going, I can't sit any longer, this video is going on and on, it's a video, you can stop it, you can pause it and come back later. All right, in the old days, they used to spank you. And in older days, they used to spank you. And in the old days, I guess they still give you drugs. We have a drug for that, Ritalin, which you can get abused. And then the people go and drink a Slurpee. My son Joey never had a Slurpee. I never had a Slurpee. A friend bought me one time and I had a sip, and I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. It's pure sugar. And so the kids get off the bus at the 7-Eleven and go in and buy like these ginormous sodas. No wonder we're hyperactive. So why not feed them real food, acupuncture, acupressure, just a hug, which we've all not had for 2 years. So there's a picture of dopamine. It's a monoamine, it has the one amino group. And there are so many different receptors. This guy is so complicated, but it is related to Parkinson's. So it has to do with movement, the coordination of movement, with bipolar, with your emotions, with your ability to pay attention, schizophrenia. I'm not a fan of horror movies. Your ability to focus, your ability to plan, and the street drugs, pretty much all are somehow affecting dopamine. So while the hallucinogens are affecting serotonin in some way, this is your reward center. You're going to pay attention because you're getting a reward. So things like cocaine and methamphetamine are going to somehow affect dopamine. So you get a big reward and nothing else is going to do that. And then your body compensates. It creates memories of pleasure. This is the pleasure trap. So sugar, we talked about sugar. Sugar creates this same effect. And then, it's the pleasure trap. You keep wanting more. So addictions. And so again, normal brain, you see these nice lighting up, you see normal amount, and then the cocaine abuser they're getting a mother load released, and then the body stops making dopamine because it's saying, whoa, that was too much. That was way too much. And this was a picture I showed before that sugar actually has a similar effect as cocaine. It decreases. So red is normal amount of dopamine, which is normal. And the person who is obese and the cocaine addict, both, they've overstimulated the pleasure center. And so they don't release it. Their bodies stop making it. I have not read this book, but I've heard amazing stuff about it. And Dr. Lustig, we will talk about. So I've talked about this before, but it's worth reviewing because everybody's like, well, I don't do street drugs. I'm not going to worry about that. How many of you go to Starbucks still and eat a bagel? So this is not just the super sweet stuff, the bagels, 2 commercial baked goods a week, double depression. So there's a huge link of sugar and depression. And the reason is free radicals. We keep coming back and talking about it. So somebody loses an electron and you end up shrinking your brain. You end up decreasing you overstimulate the dopamine, the reward center, and then you stop making it. And there's a shrunken brain. None of us want a shrunk brain. And so how can you restore your brain? Because our brain does restore. Is you eat nutrient-dense foods. You eat the rainbow, fruits and vegetables, phyto, plant-based, and that makes your brain nourished, and so you can communicate. And so we saw this slide before, and so the green is somebody on a plant-based diet. It doesn't mean you can never eat meat, and the brown is the beige diet, the American-based diet, and there's no comparison. In fact, the beige diet, they have negative numbers in some places. Just crazy. So yeah, points improved, fatigue, there's no comparison. The thing is, supplements don't do this. It's all in the vibes. It's all in the vibes. So they're having fruit around the house. Kids love fruit. These slides drive me crazy. That's why I showed it. And if you love it, great. You can find these all over online and everyone's different. The big picture is these are all going to make you happy. So I'm not going to ask you which one's the happy one, which one's the reward one. It's more that these are all, and it's a balance point. We need all of them. And so that's Olivia saying, be happy, just celebrate, just be happy, relax. Do we have to overanalyze? Noradrenaline does this. And so this is noradrenaline or norepinephrine and epinephrine. So epinephrine works as a hormone. It is released by our adrenals. It is also released by our neurons. And so it's our fight or flight. So adrenaline causes us fear, lack of control, feeling judged, our muscles tighten, right? We're in that fight and flight, freeze, right? That's what adrenaline causes, and cortisol. We talked about all of that. Whereas we're going to do the polypeptides next. Oxytocin, endorphins. They are called collect and protect. They're the love hormones. They help you to feel loved, safe, supported. You have a choice. Do you want to be in fear or do you want to be in love? We are meant to be in love. It's a message of all the great masters is love. Always choose love. So, polypeptides, endorphins. It is another molecule of happiness. There is not one molecule of happiness. So they bind the opiate receptors. So morphine is a plant-based molecule, been known for thousands of years, that it changes your perception of pain, meaning you don't feel pain. And so it's what hospice uses to help people. It's the most addictive, I think, molecule that there is. And yeah, so endorphin means endomorphine, endogenous, inside. Endo is inside. It is our natural morphine that is made inside of us. The picture below shows what morphine looks like, and the picture above is what an endorphin looks like. Or there's another picture of endorphin, but you can see that it's going to bend and fold, and so it's all about binding to the receptor. Our body makes just the right amount, and that's what they do. It binds the opioid receptor. You've all heard about opioids. And so acupuncture works because it stimulates the release of endorphins. Acupuncture is amazing for pain, and it changes your perception of pain. You have to be patient. So you have to make the molecule and then it has to bind. It's not like instantaneous, like when you take a pill. That pill is ibuprofen. That actually works by changing this. Oh, and by the way, dark chocolate stimulates the release of endorphins. Dark chocolate is amazing. The receptor is called the Keplin Receptor. So there's some places in the homework, sometimes I use the word enkephalin, but endorphins, you have these receptors everywhere in your body, everywhere. Your immune system, your digestive system. And there's only one place you don't, and that's your brain. Your brain cannot feel pain. Fascinating, huh? It was considered the molecule that was the runner's high, that people who exercise, when you exercise for a long time, you kept wanting to exercise because you released this. This is not actually the runner's high. There is another molecule that is the molecule that's released as the runner high. The thing is this other neurotransmitter stimulates the release of the endorphins as well as dopamine. So it's like the master molecule behind it all. So if you have low level, this is released by the pituitary. So another one of the chakra centers. And there's like different ones. They talk about alpha, beta, gamma, and how many amino acids. But anyway, they affect your pain perception. It binds to the receptor, and it creates substance P, and substance P is a neuropeptide. I'm sorry, substance P is what makes you feel pain. The endorphins will bind the receptor and block the substance P, blah, blah, blah. Capsaicin, really fun molecule. It actually blocks the substance P receptor too, so you don't feel pain. So chili peppers help you deal with pain. So a lot of people either eat chili peppers or put it on topically. Those are pictures that drive me crazy. They're like showing you how things interact. This is actually fascinating. Smiling releases endorphins. And every one of you, as soon as that picture came up, you went, oh. Belly dancing, affirmations, positive words to yourself. I just bought a book on affirmations because there's definitely an art, and it's the feeling, the intention behind the affirmation, truly believing what you say. And Qigong, it's like Tai Chi, and that is what I study and practice for over 25 years now, and smiling. So that was one of my former students. This is right before COVID. This is actually COVID was going on. We just didn't know it. This was in March of 2020, and that's me behind. And we were making, trying to start with cow's milk to make glue, to make flubber slime. And anyway, we're having a lot of fun and smiles, lots of smiles. So gluten is from wheat, and there's a reason this is here. Gluten is actually a protein that's found in wheat, and it looks just like endorphins. So it's an exogenous, and it's digested into pieces, into individual amino acids. So it's called an exorphin, so an exogenous morphine. And there's the endorphin. These two look much more alike. The thing is that we've modified we've modified wheat, and so we don't have the enzyme that recognizes gluten and gliadin anymore. And so we're not able to cut it into the single amino acids and absorb it. And so it cuts it into these tripeptides that our body can't absorb. And so you end up getting bloated. So your body's trying to flush them out. And so all this water comes into your small intestines because you can't absorb it. And remember, 90% of your serotonin receptors, as well as all of these other guys, have receptors all over there. So your small intestines is feeling all gurgly and stuff. Your microbiome is getting all confused. Everyone's gluten sensitive because we changed wheat. If you can get the ancient wheat, which you can at some stores, usually you can deal with it. So it doesn't just cause, gluten doesn't just cause digestive disorders. It can cause depression. It causes mood issues, and it's a different type of mood issues. Everybody has a gluten sensitivity. Just some people, it's much more severe. And then some people ends up causing an epigenetic shift and the amount of processed food. There's a skyrocketing rate of people who actually have their DNA is modified, so they can't even digest any kind of gluten. But anyway, gluten is addictive. So people say, nope, I don't have gluten sensitivity because gluten is an opioid. So it changes your perception of pain. So when you eat bread, when you eat pizza, you feel better because you don't feel pain. And so you keep wanting to eat more and more until we've eaten 26 additional pounds per year per person. In the 1950s, the average male weighed 150 to 165, had a 32-inch waist. And in 2010, it was over 200 pounds. And after COVID, it's probably another 50 pounds and another 10 inches on the waist. I don't even want to think about what it is after COVID. They're not telling us the numbers because it's not pretty. Yes, the amount of people in the US that are overweight and the amount that are obese is the real epidemic. Kraft foods, meanwhile, makes astronomical amount of money. And then they even went on the gluten-free thing. It's processed. So just because it says gluten-free, if it's packaged, you don't want to eat it. It's still processed. So you're addicted. It changes your behavior. You actually change a protein in your intestines that changes the permeability, and you will actually end up with some issues. Some people end up with some severe issues with this. So people don't become diabetic when they eat salmon and blueberries and garlic and asparagus. That's a quote from a book. And it has the same effect on your body as heroin. They're both opioids. It's why you don't want to give up your bread. It's also why you don't want to give up your milk. casein is an opioid. I'm sorry, cheese, right? People are like, hey, I can give up dairy, but not cheese. So there's morphine, there's heroin, schizophrenia, autism, they all respond to including ADHD. So that's the med that are given to heroin addicts, naloxone. And there we go. Oxycodone was one of the first opioids that was out there, and then fentanyl and all these other crazy ones. And we all know it has an addictive issue. It actually decreases your appetite. So the same thing they're giving to heroin addicts, they're giving to people who are obese to change their perception of pain and decrease the amount of food they eat. Fascinating, right? And well, you know what? If you got to go death, this is my near death by chocolate experience. And I think it was the last time Joey and I had ice cream. So that was at my alma mater. This is actually really cool. This is in your spit, the ultimate painkiller, the strongest opioid of them all, more powerful than morphine, the most powerful one. That's picture morphine in the upper corner. The middle picture is a picture of opioorphan. It has no side effects. It doesn't have the addictiveness. And it's in your spit. It's in human spit. That's why your mom would kiss your knee when you skinned your knee and you felt better, because she actually had opioids. Your mom has magic in her kiss. So they actually hurt the rats in the study and then they kissed them. They didn't. They painted on the opioorphan, and the rats no longer lick their wounds. So when animals are injured, they lick their wounds. And so they injured the animals. This is terrible research. And then they spit on them, and then they stopped licking their wounds because everything felt better, and they started playing the fiddle. Have fun when you do your studies. And then they said to the rats, okay, now that we spit on you, walk over a bed of nails. And they did. Really crazy. There had to be food on the other side for them to do it. So the ones that had been injected with the opioorphan, which had been isolated from human spit, actually walked over the bed of nails, no problem at all. And so that is why kisses are kind of magic. All right. Let's see, where are we going? Oh, and Dracula's saliva. Again, this is pretty cool. So it's DSPA. No, I'm pretty sure it's DSPA. The second one's a typo. This is so vampire bats, when they bite the cow neck, they don't want the blood will normally coagulate, so stop it. We release enzymes to stop to make the blood clot, and so the vampire bat, when it bites, it releases this enzyme that blocks coagulation, so the blood doesn't clot and they can suck your blood. And when they isolated this enzyme, they said we can use this as an anti-clotting, and it's what they give people when they have a stroke. And it's actually totally changed how strokes are treated if they're caught fast enough, which means pretty much immediately. So before, people had a stroke and they ended up in a nursing home, and now people will walk out of the hospital. All right. The cause of stroke is not old age. Cause of stroke is not having a good diet and not a good attitude. All right, next category, moving right along, are the amino acid neurotransmitters. And these are the ones that are most interesting. So the very first category, the cholinergic, were ionotropic. The next two categories, which were the amino acid derivatives and the polypeptides, were metabotropic. Amino acid neurotransmitters are both. So they actually work as ionotropic and metabotropic, which is really fascinating. So one of the things, I don't know much about these, other than to know they talk about them as excitatory or inhibitory. So these are not all amino acids or neurotransmitters, but the ones that are, some of them are going to excite the neuron, so it's going to keep it excited, and some of them are going to slow it down. It's all about a balance. It's all about a balance. So there we go. They look like amino acids. So Gaba is one of them. Those are some of the drugs that are used. So like gabapentin is used as a pain medication, has serious side effects, serious problems with, they don't want to say the word addiction, but are serious problems because people don't want to stop and they want to take more and their personality changes. So GABA is considered a molecule of meditation. So here we go. The top one is glutamate, which everyone calls glutamic acid, but in our body, it would actually be ionized. So those OHs would just be O negative. That's not a big deal. So that is a neurotransmitter and it's excitatory. So the molecule up above is glutamate. It is an amino acid. It is builds proteins, but it's also a neurotransmitter. And so in our central nervous system, it stimulates. Aspartate, which is the other acidic amino acid, is also an excitatory neurotransmitter. Glutamates, and so I think I should have done the talk on MSG, so monosodium glutamate. And so a lot of people have sensitivities to MSG because it overexcites and they get a headache because of the excitement to that, like brain cells or whatever. And then this gets modified really simply. The carboxyl group, so a decarboxylase, a lyase, cuts off that carboxyl over on the right, and we make GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid. And so most people have heard of GABA. And so GABA is the calming or inhibitory. So it is a balance. It's not that one causes panic and the other causes calm. That's how it's taught. It's that you need both because it's all about a balance. We don't want that pendulum effect that we all know we've been in where we go from one extreme to the other. And that's what medications cause. We want our body to find that perfect balance point because there are times we want to be alert and excited, the glutamate, and there's times when we want to have that calming effect. And so glutamate is the one that excites. And so it helps to keep our brain alert, like when you're watching this video. And GABA is the one that helps to tone down the chatter. So when you're getting ready to go to sleep or you just want to sit quietly and read, the two of them together help to make us a sharper focus. It's a balance point. It's all about balance, baby. So anti-anxiety medications try to mimic GABA. Also neuropathy, because the unfortunate misbelief is that neuropathy is the nerves are overstimulated. It's actually a circulation issue. And so we need to get better circulation. And all right, anyway, meditation helps to, of course, increase GABA. And it was actually more powerful than exercise to help. People with addictions tend to have low GABA. And so interestingly, this kind of drives me crazy because people get diabetes, they end up with neuropathy, and doctors, since they don't want to give people opioids, they go, here's GABA. GABA will calm down the overexcitement. GABA interferes with the pancreas. And I'm sorry, gabapentin. Yeah, so anyway, those are my Tibetan monks that I talked about. This is, we were in Utah, so I'm the short one and with the big sunglasses. Anyway, I took them out. See what? No, they were Tibetan monks, right? Except that they have these awesome smiles. All right, so we're in the other category, which means we're in the home stretch. Adenosine is the neurotransmitter. Adenosine is that molecule of sleep. Adenosine slows everything down and makes you sleepy. Isn't that beautiful? You feel sleepy. It dilates your blood vessels, oxygenation happens, and you fall asleep. And some people sleep with their eyes open. Caffeine looks just like adenosine. You can see it's circled there. And so caffeine binds to the receptor and it blocks it. And so it's an antagonist because it's blocking it, because it's not the exact same thing. And you stay awake because you don't slow down. And to answer your question, you're wide awake. All right. Where am I going with this? Oh, and so we're to the last molecule, number 1. It is considered, in this article I read about the molecules of meditation, that is me in the far east of Oregon, Hell's Canyon. It's the first time I'd ever been there. And so I'm doing my Qigong, which is like Tai Chi, but it's specific movements and stuff. And the molecule that's around me is my favoriteest molecule, anandamide. And so again, this was from an article. There we go. I finally have a reference on the molecules of meditation. There's the Dalai Lama in meditation. And this is what your lab is about, is you are all going to meditate for the week. So let's talk about anandamide and meditation. So anandamide, there it is. It is a modified fatty acid. We'll see the picture of how it is, but see all the beautiful cis. So it's one of the polyunsaturated. It's coming from one of our essential fat acids. And it was first isolated in 1992. And the name, this is possibly one of the reasons why it's my favorite. So Ananda is the Sanskrit word for bliss, and an amide is a chemical term for the connection of that nitrogen group. See my pointer to the double bonded oxygen. Anyway, so that's an amide. So it's anandamide. And so Ananda was the name of Buddha's right-hand man, and Ananda was having trouble reaching bliss, nirvana, until he was able to finally just let go. It doesn't mean that you empty yourself of thoughts. You just let go of your attachment to them. Trust me, I haven't reached there yet, but I do fall asleep beautifully. Anyway, and there's the amide. So it was called anandamide, and it binds the CB1 receptors. So you know where we're going with this, maybe. The CB1 receptors are pretty much in every tissue in your body. So again, these are so much more than just the nervous system. It's so much more than just about your brain. The brain gets all this illumination these days. We do want our brain illuminated. It's your whole system working in harmony. Your immune system has these receptors. So inflammation and stuff. So this is called the endo. Endo is inside cannabinoid system. And it's arachidonic acid. So cannabinoids mean that the exocannabinoid system is THC, which is marijuana. And so the endocannabinoid system, this is what's so cool. It works backward. I didn't know this. I just learned about this in 2022, right? So your teacher always learns. So almost all receptors, everything we've talked about, the neurotransmitter is released and goes forward across, and it finds the key that binds into the lock on the receptor, which is called the dendrite, the one that's receiving the impulse. And so the cannabinoid receptor is on the other one. It goes backwards. So this was actually my student Lydia in the fall of 2021 did her talk on anandamide, and I'm like, you know, when people pick something that I've already, but she blew me away. She made these slides. So some of you have these skills to make these things. So anyway, it works backwards. And they actually only recently figured this out, like in the past decade. I have no idea how long, but it works backwards and then it goes back and it stimulates the release of like dopamine and serotonin, like other neurotransmitters, which is really cool. This is like the master switch. All right. And so breaking it down, that is my son, Joey. We were in Nepal and it was raining a lot and we were stuck in a little 2-person tent, the 3 of us, and we just found our bliss point. So there's anandamide. This is another one, the picture below, arachidonyl glycerol. That is also part of, it's a molecule we make in our body. It's part of the endocannabinoid. The picture in the middle is, remember, the enzyme. This is a key player here. Anandamide is known as the bliss molecule. Bliss is beyond happiness. Bliss, Ananda, is the word. It's divine bliss. It is what we are trying to achieve. It is nirvana. And this is what the molecule is that they link to it. And then FAAH is fatty acid hydrolase. And it's going to cut it into essential fatty acid in this guy, ethanolamine. Oh, that enzyme. Oh boy. So fatty acid amide hydrolase. It's quite a mouthful. So FAH. So it's broken down by FAH really fast. Remember the enzyme, the shark? This is the thing that's really cool. 20%. So my goal is, let's get you all up. So all of us are mutants. What if you were one of the people who had a mutation where you don't have this enzyme? I'm pretty sure this enzyme is not active until you hit puberty, because children just smile, you're bliss, they're just so happy. You have enhanced levels of happiness. They've done studies on this, and this is what happens if you have this mutation. Mutations get a bad name. Mutations are amazing. University of Calgary compared a group of genetically happy humans. So these people who do not have this enzyme, they're just always happy. I had a student in my class right before COVID happened. And I remember I was, for the first month, like confused. I'm like, why is this guy always smiling? Like, what is he smoking or something? But I got to know him really well because he was in my class for 3 terms and during the whole COVID thing, and was always at my office hours. And we're still in touch all the time. And he is just a happy person. And I'm sure he has this mutation, as are the Sherpas. Anyway, they changed the mice. So the mice no longer made this enzyme, and they were happy. That's probably Photoshop. But the mice and the men had higher levels of anandamide because they didn't break it down. And this is the key. It could extinguish the fear-based memories. They didn't end up in fear. If you're not in fear, you're in love. You are in love. All the Tibetans, all the Sherpas are smiling like I've never seen. I think they're the 20%. You can become too. We're going to get there. So greater connectivity between the cognitive planning and the emotional memory. And so mice and men had lower anxiety and increased emotional stability. All right. Here we go. Reference again. Do try to remember references, but if you don't. So this is the molecule of exercise. There's other ones also, but this is the runner's high that is talked about. The more a person exercise, the more anandamide you release, and that creates the release of dopamine and the endorphins, and you feel better. It's also a natural pain reliever because it changes your perception of pain. It lowers your anxiety. That's why we love exercise, and you get motivated and reward right after you exercise. Initially, it's hard to go out and exercise, but once you exercise, you always feel good, right? Well, anyway, even better than exercise is meditation. People who regularly meditate or mindful practice or contemplative prayer, whatever you want to call it, had a much greater increase in anandamide. And so I think once you become a regular meditator, you actually change your DNA and you become the mutant. This is actually the gal on the left is a girl I sponsor in Nepal. She's now 18. And she actually got a scholarship to come to the US to study for 2 years, and her sister's in law school in Nepal, but there's that natural smile of children. So again, that's why I said, or if you just make a mess in lab. And so you should all take a lab-based science and for real, or make a mess in your kitchen. And I was doing it with the kids, and then the kids wanted to get their hands messy. And then once they saw me just get my hands all messy and gooey, they came over and did it too. All right, So the phytochemicals, the phytomolecules, THC, which is marijuana. So THC actually stimulates the receptor. I have a picture in a moment that shows this better. CBDs, so they have a very different effect. So THC causes the high. CBDs actually inhibit the enzyme. Fascinating. This is not part of the lab. This is not what you're doing. You're meditating, not smoking marijuana or taking some kind of street drug to see what happens. All right. So there's a picture of anandamide on the left, and there's a picture of THC. So you can see once it's folded, they would look similar to fit into the receptor. And anyway, this is the thing, that your body makes just the right amount, even when you don't have the enzyme. But when you are smoking it, you're getting a huge influx at one time, and it has an effect on your brain. Those are pictures from Harvard. There's tons of these pictures out there. Another case study is anandamide is actually the chemical messenger. There's a vibrational messages between mom and baby, but there actually then becomes a chemical messenger between mom and the baby inside of her. And yeah, that's really cool. And THC actually appears to interfere with the signal between mom's uterus and the embryo that's inside her. So when mouse, they didn't actually make them smoke, they probably injected them with THC-like compounds. They found that the fetus did not survive and had abnormalities. And there's the reference. So chocolate, on the other hand, has double, I think it actually has triple the bliss. So dark chocolate contains N-acetylethanolamine, which prevents the breakdown of anandamide. So by the way, if you don't know how to say the molecule's name, just go with it, because nobody but your teacher will know, and I'm not going to call you out on it. So just, you can ask Google. Google always does phonetically, which is really fun. So there are 3 molecules that are similar. So that first molecule actually helps to block the enzyme. And then there's 3 more molecules in chocolate that stimulate the receptor. You can't eat enough chocolate, though, to end up with a shrunken brain. Trust me, I've tried. All right. We're getting there. So this slide is just a question for you to ponder. So I am a biochemistry teacher, so I am required to teach you about the molecules. So I've been talking about the molecules that communicate in our body, but I do want to put a question to you to just ponder it in your meditation. Can this mechanistic, reductionist, scientific explanation actually explain consciousness? Think and just ponder, what is consciousness? So it's really clunky. We have a key, we have to fit it in the lock. We're like those guys. We're like the pirates saying, give me the key, give me the key. We want to learn all this material and memorize all these little pieces. How many of you actually use keys anymore? Well, most of us, this is the dog saying, we use remotes. Most people, a lot of people, they get a new car, it's actually on their phone. So they're inside, they start their car up from inside, so it warms up or cools down or something. So we're vibrational beings. There's again your Merkaba. We're all about vibrations. That's how our body actually communicates. That comes first. The chemical clunkiness comes second. Our body knows. Our DNA, we are quantum beings. That's chakra system. That's actually the whole point of meditation, is to activate your chakra system again. And your DNA molecule looks just like it, doesn't it? All right, so about the lab, I'll talk about this more in class. Find your method. You could listen to a guided meditation. Whatever you do, open to love. Just focus on love. You got to smile. The gnomes know. They're always smiling. If you're not smiling in meditation, why bother? So again, you can listen to a guided meditation. I have times, especially about this time in the term, where I can't find my quiet point. So I listen to a guided meditation. And so I can get to the point where I don't need it again. Be playful. All right. No idea what happened to Joe, but those are different. It's actually on the handout, some of the names. You have to find the guided meditation. Some people have tried like all of mine, and you're going to know in the first 5 minutes, there's something with the voice. There's something about your mood. You don't have to like mine. You can find your own. Those are just suggestions. There's always one person in the class who will be like, oh my gosh, your meditation was amazing. And then there'll be 10 others going, I didn't like yours. They were really weird. Don't do it. That's fine. Find something. You don't have to listen to a meditation. So there's Joey, there's us in the Himalaya. And he's meditating, sitting. You can sit. You don't have to. You can sit in a chair. You can do standing. You could do yoga. However, doing the yoga is not the meditation. You can do yoga to get you to the point of Shavasana, which would be the meditation. You can read a verse in the Bible like a psalm and then meditate on it, or contemplative prayer is the terminology. You can play singing bowls. So you can go for a meditative walk. This is meditative walk in the Himalayas. All of my walks in the Himalayas, because I was so slow, like the sloth, that I learned how to walk and really had to focus on my breathing. I didn't know the terminology at the time, but I was doing meditative walking. So it was the only way I could keep moving. You can do laying down meditation. I do laying down meditation every morning before I get out of bed, and just go into a beautiful bliss place. A lot of students find you have to find the time of day. Some people like morning. Most of you are young and morning is not your best time of day, perhaps. So a lot of students find evening. I am taking a course now in meditation, and I'm just in the happiest place. And they talk about this. You have to find a place, and they say it cannot be your bedroom because your bedroom is sleepiness. And so they actually recommend a closet because it's a quiet place. And I've actually had students who told me they meditate in their closet because it was a quiet place. So if that works for you, go for it. I have a sunroom, and so I have that. You're going to find, if it's a laying down meditation, try different times of day. Try a walking meditation where you go without your cell phone. I talk about this in the handout for the lab. And yeah, find your bliss. And it could be listening to a meditation, either laying down or sitting, and that is fine. No matter what you do, you're choosing love. You're choosing joy. You're choosing to breathe. This is the meditative walking. You're not taking your cell phone with you. You're walking very slowly. And so the monks, they will do meditation all day, but they're not sitting. They sit, and then they go for very slow walking. Each footstep, you're focusing on each footstep. You're smelling the roses. This is Nobel Peace Prize laureate Thich Nhat Hanh. He died actually a month ago. He said, no mud, no lotus. And it's my cat. And so lotus is the most beautiful blossom. It's there in the lower right-hand corner. And its roots are deep in the mud. And so we often have that mud. And from the mud can come this beautiful lotus. Anyway, find your meditation. Thank you. As always, namaste. I'll see you in class. Oh, there's my monks again. We went on a picnic, and you can see they're oming actually and laughing and joking. And that blanket from Mexico they gave me, they were wearing it as the that robe. It was so funny. They're just such jokesters. All right. Bye-bye.